John Masters. I'm the Executive Director of GrassRoots Community Television in Aspen, Colorado, and I am conversing today with Richard Owen Merritt. He retired as a Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Marine Corps. Birth date was the 29th of June, 1935. He had a 22-year career in the Marine Corps from 1957 to 1979. Served in Vietnam in 1966 to 67. And over those 22 years was stationed in many different areas, and we'll go through those. Anything else you'd like to go over to start?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Colonel, you were studying forestry at the University of Washington in your hometown of Seattle, and how did we get from forestry to into the service?
Well, in 1953 I graduated from high school, and I took a national scholarship test for the Navy Reserve Officer Training Corps at the University of Washington to become a midshipman. And I was successful, and I had earned a scholarship that was better than a football scholarship. We had tuition and a stipend, and we got to go to Europe every summer on with the Navy. So I wore a Navy uniform for 4 years, and then took a Marine Corps commission at the end of 4 years.
What was that environment on campus in the 50s for ROTC? You wore your uniform to the class?
Right. In the 50s, it was post-World War II, post-Korea. We still had many temporary buildings on the campus at the University of Washington that were built for the veterans under the GI Bill. And so it was very pro-military. I was proud to wear that uniform on the campus in the 50s.
Were those who weren't in the ROTC envious?
Oh, like I say, it was better than a football scholarship, because in those days nobody was traveling, only the military. This was before the jet age, and so we would travel from Seattle down to Norfolk, Virginia, and catch the ships out to the European ports of call and train.
And train. So tell me about that training in Europe during the summers.
Well, we would. I went on the USS Albany out of Norfolk, Virginia, and we were. Our sister ship was the Wisconsin, and we served on a 6-week tour cruise. We served 2 weeks in engineering, 2 weeks in the Combat Information Center, and 2 weeks on the deck. And I got deck down in Cuba, down in Guantanamo Bay, and I was out there with a holy stone on the teak decks, and I had a beautiful gold tan. But in the interim, we would pull into places like Oslo, Norway, and Stockholm, Sweden, and go up into the hinterland, and it was a wonderful traveling experience in those days.
So you stayed on board ship most of the time?
Yes, we stayed on ship and lived in as midshipmen. We weren't enlisted, and we weren't officers. We were in between, like the Naval Academy. We had the same status.
So you were scrubbing the deck?
Scrubbing the deck in Cuba. We were out there. So I don't know if that's the reason I went in the Marine Corps, but being in forestry, I wanted to be close to the earth, and I certainly was after 22 years in the Corps.
So how did you get from being a midshipman into the Marines?
Well, at the end of the second year, you could take an option in the Marine Corps. They had a Marine Corps instructor there, and he was recruiting, and 16% of the officer or the midshipmen could go into the Marine Corps. That's at the Naval Academy and at the NROTCs throughout the university, throughout the United States. And when I got commissioned in the Marine Corps in '57, I went to Quantico, and that one of the reasons I stayed in the Marine Corps was the quality of the officers that I served with. Second Lieutenant Jim Mora served 2 years, and he went on. He was All-American in football, and went on to coach the New Orleans Saints and the Indianapolis Colts, and Hugh McElroy. He went on to become the Bank of America, and Harding Carter was a State Department spokesman for Jimmy Carter, and lieutenants from Stanford and Princeton, and I went out of being a provincial guy to kind of raising my outlook on how our country was and meeting these high-level officers. That's why I stayed in the Marine Corps.
You said there were 16%. That was a limit.
There's a limit.
Right, and so it was a preferred alternative, it sounds
It
like.
was. Guys like Joe Bellino, who was All-American at Navy, took the Marine Corps option, and you were selected. You just didn't say, I want to be in there. They did select you. The physical and mental, and there's a lot of physical involved in it.
Okay, so what was the were there any other differences that you saw in your experience there just as you became a Marine from being in the Navy?
Well, I observed the difference in leadership, the officers, and the Navy officers as opposed to the Marine Corps officers. I went to Quantico, Virginia in 1956 and saw how Marine officers handled their men, and when I became a lieutenant, the first thing they told us was never ask your troops to do anything you wouldn't do yourself, and that means excelling physically on the rifle range, being trained to lead your troops, and taking care of your troops is number one. And I felt that I had a gift for leadership.
Was your desire to be in infantry? That is or in some other aspect of the Marines?
Well, I decided shortly after I went in the Marine, got commissioned, I wanted to make a career out of it, and so every Marine officer strives to become an infantry officer. And I did all the physical, and we took all the mental tests and all that, and when it came time to get your military occupational specialty, which is the MOS, I wound up in the artillery, and I went in and tried to get it changed to my company commander, and he said, well, your test scores are too high intellectually. We need you in artillery because we want those rounds going in accurately. So artillery's a supporting arms, but when I wound up in Vietnam, I was with the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines in a battalion landing team, and we went on Operation Hastings in July of 1966, which was the biggest Marine Corps operation. And so up to that point, we had too many artillery batteries in country for that operation, so I formed up a provisional rifle company and got to be a company commander in combat. And I'll say this about my 20 years in the Corps, they were all good years, but the 6 months I was a company commander in combat for a Marine officer is the highlight of your whole career, command and combat.
Where did you train for artillery? What kind of equipment did you use?
Right, we trained in, because the Marine Corps is a small organization, the Marine Corps has to use the Army to train its engineers in artillery. So I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma twice to be trained as an artillery officer, and then brought those skills back to the Fleet Marine Force.
What kind of technology were you using?
Well, we were using the 105 howitzers, which we still use. They're a little more sophisticated now, but back in those days we were using everything manual on the fire direction, and that was one of my specialties, was fire direction officers. So every mission that we plotted was backed up manually. Well, when the computers came in later, we didn't have the computers when I started, we still followed the missions manually, and you had to do that in case that the the generators got knocked out, knocking the computers out. So there's still a certain amount of manual things in seizing and holding and occupying that the infantry is trained to do, and we support them with supporting arms.
Where were you stationed in the 50s, and what did you do? And
Well, in the Marine Corps, and I liked it this way, if you were from the West Coast or west of the Mississippi River, you would wind up after basic school on the West Coast. So I wound up at Camp Pendleton, California, which is considered to be the Cafe Society of the Marine Corps, Southern California. And as a result of that, I wound up over my 20-year career spending 8 years at Camp Pendleton as all the way up to battalion commander, 6 years in the Pacific. And historically, the Marine Corps has been based in the Pacific. I spent 2 years in the Philippine Islands as a guard officer, 59 to 61, a year in Vietnam, a year in Okinawa, and then 2 years in Taiwan as the senior Marine in the Republic of China.
Tell me about the Philippines. What did you do there?
I was at Subic Bay. We no longer have a base there. I was a guard officer at the Naval Magazine, and also working with the atomic underwater weapons. We had a lot of things going on out there at the Naval Air Station that I was at. That was part of one of the companies. We had the aircraft carriers coming in to get ammunition and pull Liberty. And one of the things we had at that time, and I had to supervise the guarding of, we were flying U-2s out of Cuby Point in the Philippines. And that was a very interesting time to watch those U-2s take off. And we guarded them very closely.
Okay, and then you went to Okinawa after?
I went to Okinawa, let me see, after Command and Staff College. That would be in 1970, Marine Corps Command and Staff College in Quantico. And I went to Okinawa to, actually I was headed back to Vietnam for a second tour. And I'd be in,
that was Okinawa. Did you go to Quantico twice?
Three times. I started my career there as a second lieutenant. Went there as a major mid-career to Command and Staff College, and then I retired in '79 out of Quantico as the deputy director of Amphibious Warfare School. So all of my time at Quantico was schooling, and either as a student or teaching. And Quantico is the education center for the Marine Corps. It's just south of Washington, D.C., and we just opened up the Marine Corps Museum here on the 10th of November.
So after the Philippines, what happened after the Philippines?
Well, after the Philippines, I wound up back at Camp Pendleton as a battery commander, and then I got sent up to the University of Washington up in Seattle to get a master's degree in geography. And I went to Pickle Meadows, the Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, California, to teach skiing and mountain climbing, escape and evasion. And I wrote my master's thesis there on, it was titled Land Use Allocation for Military Purposes, the U.S. Marine Corps at Pickle Meadows, California. And it involved working with the Forest Service, the Bureau of Reclamation, local property owners, the State of California Game Commission to have permission for our Marines to go out and kill rabbits and deer to survive. So it was a real interesting tour. It was a three-dimensional model of land use, and as our population increases, that territory up there has more cross-country skiers and people, and we have to work with the civilian population to get our training done up there. And I might mention that facility is still in use, but it's kind of down scaled because of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. But what we are doing, we have about 20 mules up there, and we're training Marines to pack these mules for use in Afghanistan and the mountains over in the Middle East right now.
You were training in, or you were doing the training of the escape and
Both.
Both.
I was teaching and also doing research concurrently. Then I went back to the university and finished my thesis, and then came back to the Fleet Marine Force at 29 Palms, and that was just before Vietnam. And right after that, I finished my master's thesis, and I was back in Vietnam 6 months after I finished that, or in Vietnam for the first time.
Did the Marines decide that you were going to get a master's in geography?
I asked for it, and the Marine Corps is, you know, wanting their officers to get advanced education, whether it's in technology, a lot of engineering. They'll send the Marines out there. Also, programs where enlisted men can go and get the Naval Enlisted Scientific Program, get a bachelor's degree. And we send Marine officers to MIT, whatever skills the Marine Corps needs at the educational level. Officers will go out and get those advanced degrees.
So you had an opportunity to actually use that forestry knowledge at one
I
point.
did at Pickle Meadows in helping to negotiate some of the agreements. The Bureau of Reclamation wanted to build a dam where we were in the valley floor there where we were training, and we decided it'd be in the best interest. The premise is that the defense of the country comes first before building dams, and I know a lot of that thinking has changed since I wrote the thesis in 1965, but we kind of held the line there on that one.
So 29 Palms, and then you headed off for Vietnam at that
Right.
point?
I headed off for Vietnam. We left with my field artillery group from 29 Palms in February and sailed to Vietnam, and I went ashore and put the battery ashore, and then they decided they needed a battery commander to go with the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, which I wound up going to Okinawa and training with them, and then coming back aboard ship in May and making our landings in the Special Landing Force. We operated, I was first on the Princeton aircraft carrier, and we would cruise up and down the coast of Vietnam wherever there was a hot spot in the Delta or all the way up to the DMZ. We would go in on operations and reinforce the troops on the land there. And I went in on the 10th, we went in on the 10th of July into Operation Hastings up on the DMZ, up on where the rock pile is and Helicopter Ridge, and it was the most successful Marine Corps operation at that time. We were confirmed 681 North Vietnamese KIAs. These weren't Viet Cong, these were regular troops. We uncovered a field hospital dug into the ground with nurses and in the uniforms. And then we went back aboard the Princeton, and my battalion went back to State and Country, and I went back to the Philippines and picked up the Iwo Jima, which was another aircraft carrier, and picked up the 1st Battalion of the 26th Marines. And then we went into Qua Viet up north, and we took a lot of heavy casualties. This was a unit that came straight from the States and hadn't been trained in Okinawa, and the casualties were really high. The Iwo Jima, incidentally, is still in the fleet. It's over in the Middle East supporting our troops with battalion landing teams. And I've seen the Iwo Jima down in New Orleans and Katrina as a command ship, and so I kind of am related to following the Iwo Jima around.
When you first landed in Vietnam, tell me about that. What was the environment? What was did your training prepare you for what you were?
Yeah. We were physically prepared to go in. Yeah, my 20 years in the Marine Corps, The 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, was the best organization I ever served with. And we trained in Okinawa. We were acclimatized and physically up and down the island. We got on the Princeton. We were exercising every day and ready to go in. And I'll just take you back a little bit to 1957. My brother enlisted in the Marine Corps the same year that I was commissioned, and he joined the 5th Marine Regiment. And his company commander, or platoon commander, was Hans Haupt, who became a company commander with me in Vietnam. And so we have a brotherhood. And but my experience was that when we first went in, I got up that morning that we were to land on the 10th of July. This was our first really big operation going into Hastings, and the aircraft carrier was, I don't know, going 15, 20 knots in the wind and getting the wind right so we could land the helicopter. So the rifle companies all went ahead of me because I had the artillery to get set up. And when we were standing on the deck, we were waiting for the helicopters to come back and take us in. And the LZ landing zone was cleared, and I heard on the intercom on the ship medevac coming in. And in that landing zone from Lima Company, they took a Marine off of the helicopter, and he had his leg blown off. And we're standing there getting ready to go into combat on a helicopter, and he died right in front of us. And so here we go. I mean, the umbilical cord is cut, and there's no way that you're not going to go. And so we went in the landing zone, and I knew that we had mines there, and I got in the landing zone, and I tiptoed around for 30 seconds. I said, you got to get your battery in position. And from that point forward, my whole command, you never think of yourself personally. It's your troops. And if you take care of your troops, they'll take care of you. And that's the way it is in the Marine Corps, you know. And we survived, and we did well, you know. And then we reverted and sent the guns back to ship, and I formed up this provisional rifle company with half of my artillery battery, and with cooks and bakers and typists. And they're all trained riflemen, you know. I mean, we did a heck of a job out there.
So you got to command infantry after all?
In combat, yeah, after all. Yeah.
So what was Hastings about? What were you doing there?
Well, it was the first intrusion into, they were coming down, and we had, I think, 5 infantry battalions in there. We were reinforcing, and we wound up in the middle of a hornet's nest. India Company, right next to my company, had, I think, 79 casualties, about 35 KIAs, and was really a tough night for them. And of all the company commanders, let me see, Hans is dead. India Company's dead. Another one is ailing. Out of 5 company commanders, there's only probably 2 of us that are, I'll say, hale and hearty now. And I just went to the first reunion we ever had of the Battalion Landing Team 3-5 this summer in Colorado Springs. 40 years ago since I saw these officers and men. And, you know, it's the bond is there, and you're thinking of them, and I've reunited with them. And we're on the internet, you know, talking back and forth now.
Did your geography and forestry come in of any use to you in your...
The geography did, the geopolitical things at command and staff, that helped me write my papers. And of course, in the Marine Corps, we're dealing with maps all the time, and I read maps pretty well. I'll tell you why. One night we were on an operation. This was another operation off of the aircraft carrier, and we were landed in a position where we had to rely on French maps. We didn't have our own maps. And I put my whole career on the line that they told me I was at these coordinates, and there was an island in the river. We had a rifle company out there, and the Viet Cong were coming after the rifle company, and they called for fire. They gave me coordinates out here, and we didn't register, which means what we usually do. We just fired for effect, and the coordinates were right. So I do trust the French.
Okay. Were you having an understanding of geography and of the bigger picture as an officer? And were you clear on your mission? Did you know the strategy? Why you were now Hastings? Was this up close to the DMZ?
This was right on the DMZ. Yeah. Well, we knew our mission, and we. The problem was that was really the first or the last big battle where we were ready to go across the DMZ, but we were in pursuit, but we were held back. We couldn't go there. And as we put piecemeal troops in, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong sent down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, their forces, to match it. So it became a checkmate situation. Right after Hastings and the last operation, 126, I got promoted to major and lost my battery. I lost my troops and went to a staff job at Dong Ha on the DMZ, and I was in the operations center, and I was sent out for 6 weeks with a Vietnamese paratroop battalion up right on the DMZ. And I had some experiences there with people that, with the South Vietnamese in particular, and one person I like to mention is Sean Flynn, Errol Flynn's son, and he was a photojournalist. He was about 27 or 28, and a guy who carried his own weight, dug his own foxhole, was never a burden to us. And we had some firefights, and he was there with us. And after that operation, he went back down to Saigon and went out into Laos with 3 other photojournalists and was never seen again. He went into the killing fields, but he was a great young man, and I think of him often. And the other one I never did meet was Bernard Fall, who wrote Street Without Joy. And one of my assignments at Dong Ha in operations was to escort dignitaries, and I was to escort Bernard Fall the next day. And he was killed, and I never got to meet him, but I read his books and all that. And then others that I met there were, Robert Mitchum and Dandy Don Meredith, the football quarterback, came and had breakfast, and with them, and various people would come through that I would be coordinating briefings for, like McNamara, when he put up that electronic line there. We put Amtraks all around the command post, and he came in there, and my senator from the state of Washington, Scoop Jackson, came in and took photographs together, and I've got photographs of General Westmoreland and myself at the end of Operation Hastings. So I got to meet up close a lot of well-known people. John Steinbeck came, Grapes of Wrath, and autographed a book for us, So we had a lot of, I felt, support because they came. probably one of the highlights. We were up in so far north. We had a USO show come, and 6 girls came, and that was great. You know, we didn't get the Bob Hope shows because we were too far north in artillery range. It was just too dangerous to bring up the headliners. But we did have USO girls up there, and it was great.
It might have been a promotion, but that must have been a big change going from being a commander in the field to seems like a desk job and showing dignitaries or taking care of dignitaries.
Yeah, the commander in the field in combat, and that's, like I say, my prime time in the Marine Corps was that time. But I tell you, when I was with Sean Flynn and with the Vietnamese Paratroop Battalion, we were out in the jungles, and I was getting leeches on my boot tops and that. But that was 6 weeks of that, and that lasted for about 4 months. But later on, I commanded 2 artillery battalions back in the United States from 1973 to 75 at Camp Pendleton. And that was great. I had 720 men in those battalions, but it wasn't combat. In, you know, as a battalion commander, you're not as close to the troops as you are as a company commander or a battery commander.
What was it like working, fighting with the South Vietnamese Army?
Oh, they were really good. The discipline was good. A lot of them had been conscripted, and I thought the discipline was a little bit brutal of the officers to the men. We were up on the DMZ and went into an operation, and I got a Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry Bronze Star for that one, calling an artillery fire for our troops. But about 20 of the men went home to see their families. You know, they were called unauthorized absence. And when they came back to the battalion commander had them line up and get on their knees. And he walked down the line and hit every one of them on the side of the head, on the ear, you know, and they fell to the ground, and he had them get back up, and then he came back the other direction and knocked them to the ground, you know, probably piercing some eardrums. But that was the way they handled their discipline there and put them right back into the combat situation. The South Koreans were the most feared troops by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese. We had some I never worked with them, but I heard rumors of their activities with the enemy down there. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong really didn't want to engage the Koreans. Yeah.
You were in the middle of a lot of heavy combat.
Yes.
And you came through unscathed.
I should have been wounded several times. When we were over there and with the Vietnamese, I had 2 other Americans with me, and we didn't have any fresh water, and we drank out of the rice paddies, and this officer here and this officer here and myself drank out of the same helmet. They both got malaria, and I didn't. And the only way that we could tell the days of the week over there when I was, you know, with the Americans was the corpsman would come around with a great big orange malaria pill, and that meant it was Sunday. You know, that was the way it was there. But no, I had some close scrapes, and I wasn't wounded, but I should have been probably, but I wasn't. I have a friend of mine down in Glenwood. He flew 520 combat missions, and same thing. He came back 2 out of 3, didn't make it, and he made it back. And so that's fate, I guess.
Yeah. And that's what you have to leave it to.
That's right. Yeah.
After Hastings and what happened in Vietnam?
Okay, after Hastings, then things started. Let's see. I left Vietnam in March of '67 and went back to 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, and I stayed there for 2 years and went to Command and Staff College. The war kept going on, and then I went to Okinawa and wanted to go to Vietnam, but had to stay in Okinawa. Then I went in '71 to recruiting duty in Detroit, Michigan. And that was a tough deal. I was responsible for recruiting 240 Marines a month, and never missed quota in 2 years and got promoted to lieutenant colonel. But I would recruit mainly minority groups, and they wound up in the infantry, and many times I would recruit them, and 6 months later I'd have to bury them. I'd have to go to their parents and tell them that they'd been killed in Vietnam.
How do you do that?
Well, when you're a career officer, the mission comes first, and you put the mission first. And I have, in the Marine Corps, it's a bond of men that go through a tough boot camp and tough training, and the officers put the Marine Corps first. Many of my friends did 2 or 3 tours in Vietnam, and my battalion commander on 3-5, Lieutenant Colonel Bronars, made 3-star general. And he told me at Camp Pendleton, he said, after Vietnam, he said, I had a great career, but my family grew up, and I didn't know my kids. And many officers in the Marine Corps put the Marine Corps first, and their wives turned to maybe be anti-war. That happened to my friend in Glenwood. It happened to me. I got a divorce, but the Marine Corps was there for me, and sustained me because I had support there. We didn't have the support from the civilian population. The civilian population attacked us. They killed a messenger, and they should have gone to Washington. They ultimately did. And my first night back in the States, when I was married to my first wife, she introduced me on my first night back at a party, to her principal she worked for, and he wouldn't even shake my hand and asked me, how many women and children did you kill? And of course, I'm shocked. And this happened to many of my friends that came back, Marines. We didn't come back as units. We came back singly through San Francisco Airport and in uniform, and the assaults upon us as fighting men coming back left a lot of wounds that have not left today. My friend Hans Haupt, who I mentioned, was my brother's platoon commander back in 1957 at Camp Pendleton, and then served with me as a company commander in Vietnam, was at the University of California at Berkeley, and he was the NROTC instructor for the Marine Corps. And there were all the protests at Berkeley. This would be about '67. And a can of red paint was thrown upon him by a protester, and at that point the government took that protester and took him to court for destroying government property for Hans's uniform, because we were having real problems with the officer training corps on campus. You asked me in the 50s, it was great in the 50s, but in the 60s, ROTC, a lot of the colleges didn't want it allowed anymore, and there were, at the University of Washington, they burned the Clark Hall, where I was a midshipman, and protests all over Madison. And we had these, and we still have some, Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps at the best universities: Harvard, Princeton, Dartmouth, Stanford, Southern California, Berkeley, Washington, all over. and there was just you know, the turn of the backs upon the military.
When you came home to that environment, did you ever, at some point, did you start questioning?
No, because I was a career officer. I couldn't get back from Seattle to Camp Pendleton fast enough to be back, you know, with the Marines. I couldn't, and that's the way we all felt. We felt the only support we had, and not, you know, was our fellow Marines.
So it must have been incredibly difficult to recruit in that environment.
It wasn't, because the draft was on. And in Detroit was becoming depressed, and they'd had the riots there, and every time there were layoffs at Chrysler or Ford, I mean, I had people waiting in the wings, and we had what we called back then Project 100,000, and basically if you could get up in the morning and brush your teeth, and we forgot any, you know, criminal minor activities, you were in the Marine Corps, and you were in the infantry, and you were in Vietnam.
So it was preferable to go into the Marines rather than be drafted into the Army.
A lot of the people that came in the Marine Corps in the draft in that time felt that way. It's always been that way, that they want, you know, a real challenge to be physically. And I'll never forget, in Okinawa, I had, just before we went to Vietnam, we had a draftee come in the outfit, and the first sergeant briefed me, and they said, you know, Captain, we better talk about this guy here. He said, he's a hairdresser from New York City. Oh, man, a hairdresser. But by God, he was a real fighter, you know, and you can't tell a book by its cover. But he wanted to be in the Marine Corps, and he was a great Marine. And the thing is that when you do have the draft, you have a cross-section of the United States. It's a great educational experience for everyone to learn the cultures of the different regions of our country.
I'm sorry to go back here, but it seems like having to tell a mother or a family that their son has died and has got to be tougher than fighting in the jungle.
It's really tough because you emotionally, you know, you talk to the young enlistee about what the opportunities would be and for careers. And I must say that many of those ghetto youth that came in and joined the Marine Corps stayed on and made a career out of it. And it was the only way out, to get out of the ghetto and learn a skill and leadership and have build up that you were someone important, you know. Yeah, it was really tough, but that went along with the job, you know. And in the Marine Corps, there are what's called water walkers, and there are 3 categories of water walkers. One is the drill instructors. These are all hand-picked embassy Marines that guard the embassies and recruiters. And so if you're selected for recruiting duty, you're considered to be a water walker, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, okay.
What makes a Marine different than
Yeah.
Someone in another service?
Sure, and I also want to go into, this reminded me, we mentioned leadership in the Marines and never asking your men to do something you wouldn't do. I'd like to explore a little more about what being a leader is and being a commander in the Marines.
Well, first thing, your men come first. You take care of the troops. The troops eat first. In the mess line, you're in the field. If there's no food, you don't eat. If you are an officer in the Marine Corps, and every Marine is a rifleman, as I mentioned, the provisional rifle company I had in Vietnam, cooks and bakers and typists and truck drivers, they're all required to qualify with the rifle. And if any Marine doesn't qualify, and especially if an officer doesn't qualify with a rifle, of course you go back to the range, but that's a strike against you that, you know, and then physically you have to be in top shape. When I was a battalion commander and I was 39 years old at Camp Pendleton, we had a 3-mile run. I had 720 men, and I had the fastest time in the battalion. And, you know, they're pushing you, but you have to physically take care of yourself and mentally. And you can't go off by yourself and ever feel, yeah, I had a divorce. You've got to get back and lead your men. And that's, you know, leadership and setting the example for the men.
What is the big deal about being a Marine?
Well, it's an elite fighting organization. It's a macho organization. We've fought through the Pacific and the Iwo Jima battle. I don't know if you saw Flags of Our Fathers or read the book, but it has always been an organization that has prided itself in duty, courage, commitment. And the people that come into the Marine Corps basically are team players that played high school football, were outdoorsmen who used to go hunting with their fathers, skilled in marksmanship, proud of their physical carriage, and leaders, and not necessarily, what I might say, considered to be milquetoast citizens, in that a lot of them had, you know, minor scrapes with the law because of this macho thing, fighting, and we control and direct that fighting in our training, the physical fitness, pugil sticks, bayonet training, that type of thing. So there's a challenge to be a Marine, and basically you have to be strong before you go in the Marine Corps. You can't be someone who is not up to sleeping outdoor in the elements or playing football in a snowstorm, that type of thing. So we're always looking for a physical challenge.
What is different about the mission of the Marines from the
Well,
other services?
We are basically a force in readiness, and even today we are in these battalion landing teams that I was in Vietnam, where the battalion will go aboard an aircraft carrier, in this case the Iwo Jima, and they're out in the Gulf right now, and they go in and land. Now, we are in a situation where we're more in a land occupation position, which is not really our mission, but that's where we are. In the Battle of Fallujah in November 2 years ago, my old battalion was there with 3 other Marine battalions and 2 Army battalions. So we took a lot of casualties there. And it seems like today that wherever there's a hot spot anywhere in the world, these battalion landing teams will go to the Horn of Africa or go down to Indonesia and help on relief or help in the Philippines. So we're a force in readiness, and we're lean, and we have our own air wing, our own helicopters. We rely on Navy shipping, so we're very mobile, is the role that we play.
Do you think this, I guess, natural selection of men who go into the Marines, along with the training, do the Marines come out of war more intact perhaps?
No, we take
stronger?
a disproportionate share of casualties. We have always been put up in Vietnam, up on the DMZ, up in the I Corps. Even, you know, we're a smaller fighting force on a percentage basis of the total military. We're still drawing the highest percentage of casualties of KIAs.
I guess maybe I was thinking psychologically. Is it a stronger, tougher group? They survive better.
They are as strong as, you know, as any group that I serve with, the Marines today. However, they're being subjected to more combat than we were in that. I'm speaking of Iraq, where they're in Iraq for 7 months and back in the States for 7 months. But during the 7 months back in the States, they're subject to deployment with the battalion landing teams. They come back and they go right back into Iraq. I have one of my friends who's a helicopter pilot who's done 5 tours, 35 months in Iraq, and he's going back for his 6th tour, 42 months. And so there is a lot of post-traumatic stress syndrome that is a big concern. And the wounded, I work with the disabled veterans here in April every year, and I will probably have about 55 this year from Walter Reed. Mentally and physically, the toll is heavy today. Army, Navy, Marine Corps, the Navy corpsmen are taking you know, you see Navy casualties in the newspaper. They say, well, what are those guys doing on ships getting killed? Well, they're up with the Marines. I had in my outfit in Vietnam a corpsman. His name was Appleby. He was a great corpsman, and he wore the Marine Corps uniform. And because his name was Appleby, he had a tattoo on his arm. It was a red delicious apple with a bumblebee, Appleby, you know, on top of it. So the troops are stressed today. They are really stressed, and I think even more so. I mean, Vietnam was tough, but we knew that after 1 year, we would go home and we wouldn't be sent back for another year. And so, and even then in Vietnam, if you wanted to extend for 6 months, the Marine Corps or the military would send you any place in the world you wanted to go, Australia or England or whatever, and many Marines would extend for, you know, 1 or 2 tours, and rank came fast, and everybody had pocket money, so to speak, and you could travel the world. And the problem was when they came back to the United States, and I was a battalion commander, they'd come to my battalion with maybe $10,000 or $12,000 in their pockets, and they go out and buy a new fast car and go up to LA from Camp Pendleton, and they wouldn't come back on Monday morning because they got killed on the freeway. And they were safer in Vietnam than they were back in the States. That's the way it was. Rank came fast, and life was good if you survived, but there was that side of the coin also.
You requested to go back to Vietnam when you were in Okinawa, but...
Right. But I wasn't allowed to because there were 10 of us that graduated from Command and Staff College, and we all had orders to go back to Vietnam. And at that time, we started pulling troops back in the summer of 1970. And so I wound up on the General G3 for General Wilson, who went on to become the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And I wanted to go back to Vietnam, and they sent a request up to Okinawa for a briefing officer in Saigon, and I volunteered to go. And the general called me in the office. He said, "You're too valuable to me here, and you're not going back to Vietnam." So I never went back for a second tour. And then concurrently, I got a law degree along the way, and they made me the Foreign Claims Commissioner for the island of Okinawa, and I worked for General Barrow, who also became the Commandant following General Wilson. So it's really unique to serve under 2 generals who became back-to-back commandants, and they were They were two of the finest men I ever knew.
What made them great leaders?
Their stature, their dignity, their caring for the troops. General Wilson had the Medal of Honor in World War II. Their bearing and the fact that they cared for the Marines.
I think we'll take a break here if we need to change the tapes.
Yeah.
Colonel Merritt, you had a degree in forestry, you got a degree, a master's in geography, a law degree. That all your experience as a leader, that would have been valuable outside of the Marine Corps. Fascinated why someone would stay for 22 years.
Well, along the way, because of my love for skiing and being a ski instructor in the Marine Corps at Pickle Meadows, I bought real estate here in Aspen 10 years before I retired, so I knew I had a good place to come to. A lot of people that weren't in the military didn't have Aspen, Colorado, and we adopted 2 Chinese children when we were in Taiwan, and we raised them here from the time they were 1 year old. And so I knew that I had some psychic income by being in Aspen and living in this environment, which I still live in today and teach skiing every day. So I've had a lot of people, my students that are instructors, that tell me that they're Wall Street semi-magnets, that they said they'd gladly trade places with me just to be here, just to be here. So I've had, I've been blessed with health and a good life and an opportunity to meet people of high standing, and it's enabled me to teach private people with a lot of credentials here in Aspen. And that's one thing. Living in the world and being stationed around the world, I've traveled with the Marine Corps on leave through Thailand and India and all through Europe, and I can converse with people and understand where they're coming from, and just generally relate to the world in a better manner.
I think to civilians who have never been in the military, or those who were only in for a short while, it seems like a choice of that is outside the mainstream. That is a peculiar life that must be difficult to have a regular social life, family life. Can we speak to that and the challenges of being a career officer?
Right. Well, you have choices. Like when you're overseas, you live in government housing. In Taiwan, I lived quite well as lieutenant colonel in Bank of Taiwan housing. I had a garden boy, and my wife had 2 maids, one to sew and one to cook. In the Philippines, I had a garden boy when I was a lieutenant. When I was in the States, I basically lived quite well in Southern California in the Cafe Society of the Marine Corps. Always lived on the beach. I owned condominiums in La Jolla, California at one point, and so it was my choice that I could live as well as the civilians. I don't know about today if I could buy into the California real estate market, but I could 20 years ago and live quite well. And we were accepted in the community, invited to the social events, and enjoyed a good life if you wanted to live in the civilian society.
So it's pretty good being an officer.
It's good being an officer. Yeah, it really is.
You have the freedom and
you have the freedom. I do believe in the rank structure because of financial things. Times have changed. When I was lieutenant, we had, and probably up to a major, we had officers clubs, staff NCO clubs, and enlisted clubs. But because of the economics of the situation in the civilian community, there were a lot of places where you could go for recreation and meals, and the officers clubs and staff NCO clubs weren't pulling their weight financially, so they combined the officers and the staff NCO clubs together. And I don't think that it's good to socially be mixing with the enlisted people, especially if you have a disciplinary situation and you're an officer at the club on a Friday night and maybe had too much to drink, and the staff sergeant's going to come in for office hours on Monday morning, and he's there with his wife and sober. And I think that the two, there has to be a distinction between these groups. The fraternization, I don't believe in.
You were in Vietnam for a year.
Yes.
Yep. And so it seems like in World War II there were out for 4 years or more. Today it seems like there's a lot of soldiers that have to go back. It must be, maybe you were fortunate. The stress. Talk about that stress of having to go back or being overseas for a long period of time.
That's the way it was. I grew up as a young boy. I think I was 5 years old when the World War started, and when it ended I was 9 or 10. But the civilian community was behind the war effort. We had savings bond drives. We had victory gardens. My mother saved all the bacon grease for munitions. My father raised rabbits, and every Sunday we'd have rabbits to eat. And so everyone sacrificed here in the States for the war effort. And coming out of the Depression, the people were pretty strong. And it was understood, you know, that our land had been invaded, and so there was a strong desire to prevent any enemy from coming to this territory. And then we got into, I'll just take Vietnam, where we had the draft and built the Marine Corps up to twice the size it is today, so that you knew that you had 1 year to serve there, R&R at the middle of 6 months, unlike the war in the Pacific that our forefathers fought. And it was a lot. It was tough in World War II. Vietnam was tough, but I don't think that you knew you were coming back at a given time. But I think what's going on in Iraq today is even tougher. The stress level of being sent back. If you enlist in the Marine Corps for 4 years today and you're in the infantry, you're going to go to Iraq for 3 tours, which is 21 months in a real tough combat. And I've been observing the Iraq War, and I would rather fight in the jungle than I would in an urban environment in Baghdad against 6 million people.
I don't know if we skipped anything here, but I'd like to talk about Taiwan. Is there something in your career we missed before you went to Taiwan? Yeah,
Taiwan was an accompanied tour. As I mentioned, I'm rather unusual in serving so much time overseas, but I went to the Philippines with my first wife and went to Taiwan with the second wife, and we had no children, and we adopted 2 Chinese children there. And as I mentioned, I was the senior Marine in Taiwan, and the commandant of the Chinese Marine Corps was my counterpart, and I was involved with the State Department and the CIA over there. And the thing that really got my attention was I got there in July of 1976, and in September of 1976, the Admiral called all the officers into his office, and Admiral Snyder and told us that Mao Zedong had died. And here we are in Taiwan, and sabers are rattling, and Quemoy and Matsu and everything, and I thought, the world's going to go crazy and whatever, they're going to lose control and come over, and they still want to come communist mainland China and take over Taiwan. And I was, you know, in the middle of that confrontation, and I felt just like I did in 1961, where I was on leave in Europe, coming back from the Philippines around the world, and I was in Germany when the Berlin Wall went up, and I was away from the Marine Corps. There were no Marines around, and I thought, I'm caught in the middle of the start of World War III, and I've had that feeling twice, you know, in Germany and in Taiwan and China, and that was probably my best tour as far as utilizing all my education, my training, everything I learned in combat in Vietnam. I helped train the Chinese Marine Corps and transferred that experience to the Republic of China.
Was that your primary mission there?
My primary, well, I was in the Taiwan Defense Command, and it was unified command. We had an admiral in charge. We had a Air Force general and second in command. And we had a Navy captain I worked for. We had Army colonels, Marine colonel myself. So it was a very, very interesting command, and I can't really mention some of the intelligence that we were involved with, but it was very interesting.
So it was almost a political.
Yes, it was a political deal. And that's the thing too, you know, not only are we trained to fight, but we're trained in social and politically to interact with wherever you're stationed. In Detroit, you know, I'm interacting with a civilian population there and recruiting these Marines to come into the Corps.
What were the Marines? How many United States Marines were there in Taiwan at that time?
There were the Embassy Marines, about 12, and then 2 over at the MAG, and myself, 15.
So you weren't there to defend Taiwan?
No, I was there to plan. I was in the planning section. But, you know, we have a saying in the Marine Corps, once a Marine, always a Marine. There's no such thing as a former or ex-Marine. And your father was in the Marine Corps, and I think you knew the sense of pride that he would sound off and let people know that he was in the Marine Corps, and he was proud to have fought in the Pacific.
Yes.
In World War II.
That's true. It's still to this day. I believe you were involved with some sort of nuclear warfare planning,
Yeah.
or can you talk about that?
That was my second military occupational specialty. I was a nuclear weapons deployment officer, and I was in the reliability program and in charge of reliability, which means that you have to be, yeah, you're in the Marine Corps, but you have to be morally and physically, you can't be having domestic problems because there's a chance to compromise the nuclear situation. And I got involved in the nuclear weapons out in the Philippines in 59 to 61. And then when I became a battalion commander, and just before that, I got sent to a number of nuclear weapons schools where I learned how to assemble the weapons and employ them, and then I became an inspector for Fleet Marine Force Pacific, and I would go out and inspect the aircraft that would be dropping nuclear weapons, all the artillery, 155 and 8-inch, the engineers, and I worked with the Navy inspectors, and never had to obviously use one, but I had all the training to employ them.
So these nuclear warheads were, it sounds like they're small enough to go on field artillery? Or?
Yeah. They aren't really big on it. We're not talking about the Big Bertha and that in Hiroshima and all that. These are, you know, pretty refined, but yet will accomplish the mission that, you know, they're designed for.
Seems like I've covered everything I can think of. Is there anything else you'd like to that we've missed that's important?
Well, I think one thing, John, that's important is that we have troops in Vietnam. We have this community here of Aspen, and they are very aware of what the veterans have done. The 10th Mountain Division, very instrumental in the ski industry in Aspen specifically, and they are appreciated. We have our ceremonies at the memorial here every Veterans Day and every Memorial Day, and the Elks Lodge has a banquet on Veterans Day and a community picnic on Memorial Day. What we have is right now today 2 young Marines from our community that are serving in Iraq, and we're very concerned, and we are in contact with them. And on Veterans Day, everyone at the Elks Lodge signed a card wishing Lance Corporal Black well. He grew up with my kids, and the other Lance Corporal Daniel Hess is the son of General Hess down here in Glenwood, who's a retired staff judge advocate for the Marine Corps. And Dan came home from boot camp and took his leave to teach skiing with me. He was on my team within the last 2 weeks, and now he'll be in Iraq within 30 days. And so we have a connection, and I've helped with the Marine Corps Toys for Tots in this valley, and I do help with the Marine recruiters to recruit Marines, and so I'm still involved with what's going on in the Marine Corps today. And so we support our troops, and specifically Lance Corporal Hess and Lance Corporal Black over there. Lance Corporal Black was here, Chris Black, and marched in 4th of July parade in his dress blues, and he was the youngest Marine, and we're really, you know, proud of him, and he's over there fighting for our country right now.
Something we didn't touch on really is what you're doing right now.
Well, since I retired from the Marine Corps, I've had a number of experiences, and they've all been basically in the ski industry. I started out teaching kids at Aspen Highlands in '79, and then I went on to become the vice president there for safety and guest services, and then the company got sold to the ski company, so I went back to Aspen Mountain, went on the ski patrol, and then I found my way back to teaching skiing to kids at Buttermilk, and I'm a team leader with 15 instructors over at Buttermilk, so I'm on the hill every day teaching skiing.
How's the Marine Corps help you in your
Well,
present career?
it's helped me really a lot in that I have organizational skills, communicate. I have every one of my team leaders is on my internet site, their phone numbers, and they report to me, and I have breakfast with them, and we go skiing together, and I try to set an example of being to work early so that they're there on time and their uniforms are clean. They're wearing their name tags. I just sent an email yesterday about the uniforms. You know, I want clean uniforms. The trousers get dirty, they're light, and I want name tags. And I put in parentheses, I don't want to sound like a Marine Corps drill instructor, but I want you to be professional. So it carries over, you know, the standards in professionalism and caring.
Is that a little different than the other team leaders in the?
Yeah, I'm older, much older. I'm competing with instructors and have to keep up the skills with them. They're 50 years younger than I am, but being a Marine, don't ask your troops to do anything you wouldn't do, so I'm not really that crazy, but I ski with them.
But they like working with you?
Oh yeah, they like working with me, and they respect my experience, and not only from the Marine Corps, but from 27 years in the ski industry. I've been around the block a few times. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. You have
I don't think so.